Anyway, it happens. Right? How's everyone doing today? An awesome day. I think that last song is very telling. I mean, thinking about where we are in the story, as we've been going in from week to week. I'm going to have a couple of people come up along the way too and share. And just a picture of really, truly how great God is. And when we stop judging Him based upon circumstance, God isn't great or not great based upon circumstance. He's great regardless of circumstance. And so He's not subjected to that. That's not what His identity is based upon. And so when we understand that, and we understand that His greatness is very much attached to your very identity. And so then when we see that the scale for which we see ourselves as being successful or unsuccessful or somehow achieve something or not achieve something, it all pales in that, because when you're identified as a son or daughter of God and a brother or sister of Jesus, none of the rest of that matters. And so success is never the goal, it's faithfulness to the family of God. So much less stress in that environment. And so today as we go back into the story in Genesis, as you always know, I want to connect the Old and the New Testament. So we start the story of Genesis in the book of James. Right? It makes sense. It's starting to make sense to you, right? Now when we're going to study Genesis, we start in James. And so if you'll go to the book of James with me, James chapter 1. And in James chapter 1 and verse 12, we begin to see something with regards to testing. And I want you to pay attention to this, because I hear God getting blamed for a lot of things. That God did this to me, and God did that to me, and that was an act of God. And you all know, you've heard all these things. And James brings some information about testing and about difficulty and about temptation and all those things, some clarity, as we look at the story of Abraham and how he was declared righteous. So in James chapter 1, verse 12, it says, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love Him. And remember, when you are being tested, some of your versions say tempted. When you're being tempted or tested, do not say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong, and He never tempts anyone else.
God say God's good, here.
God is good. That's right. Yep, that's a canine amen. Right
It sums up, man.
there. Right? Solomon said this. He goes in Ecclesiastes 3, he goes, who's to say whether the breath in the animal is any different than the breath in the person? He talks about that. He goes, they both received life from the same source. Don't ever say God is testing you. Or James is a liar. He says God's not doing that in that manner. And yet Job had a conversation with the enemy. Consider my servant Job, and in so doing, take all that he has, and yet he will serve me. And so in the context of this story of Isaiah, as he does the unthinkable, I want you to consider a couple different things as we look deeper into that story. But first, let's go to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11. In verse 17, Abraham's story was so important and so impactful that the New Testament is chock full of references having to do with this incredible journey, this incredible life of Abraham. As he bore the promise, the oath, the covenant of God. Comes all the way down to each of you. That God is absolutely faithful. How many of you heard about the story of my son and the $100 bill this week?
I didn't get it.
Yeah? Most of you? I'll give you a quick version. So, apparently people are looking for something to believe in because shortly after I put that story up on Facebook, I received a message from the editor of a magazine, and they asked me if they could write an article and publish it for the whole circulation of their magazine. And I said, that's God's story, it's not mine, so have fun with it. Shortly after that, I received another message from a guy that is doing a devotional book. And he's like, that story was inspiring, could I use that in my book? And when I received the phone call from my son, I almost didn't share it because it was just, for those of you that are around Inside Out, this is just what God does all the time. It didn't really even stand out all that much to me, except for that I wanted to share it because I knew my son would never. But these are not things that are absent from us here together. These are things we experience again and again and again and again in various forms and various ways. It's what God does. He's faithful. And so, okay, I'll tell the story again. Usually when I get a phone call from my son, it's because something's wrong with his vehicle. And usually it involves, could you bring tools? Could you bring a tow chain? Could you, yeah, it's usually something like that. Yeah. And so I receive a phone call from my son, and I'm thinking, okay, do I have time to go work on a vehicle? First thing in my mind. And so then, imagine my surprise when my son that looks like Jesus doesn't, some of you might have opinions about whether he acts like Jesus, but that's okay too. We didn't know Jesus all the way along the way, but he says, Dad, I prayed today. And I prayed that if God gave me $100, I would go and buy things for the unsheltered among us to bless them. And so he's going about his life. He goes to school. He does his thing at school. He doesn't tell me anything about this prayer until he's called me after what occurred. And so he's been on this kick where he likes bagels and cream cheese, right? And we can't buy enough for him, so he goes and buys his own cream cheese and bagels on top of what we already bring to the house. So he goes to Fred Meyer, and he's got an empty cart. There's nothing in it. Him and his girlfriend. And they start shopping, and they put some bagels and cream cheese and a couple things like that in there. And he's going to take, his own resources and go purchase a couple of things. At some point in time in the store, somebody came along and placed a $100 bill inside his cart that had the word Benny on it. There's a guy running around Salem, or girl, or somebody, I don't know who it is, but they've given up to $50,000 in $100 bills at Fred Meyer stores, hiding them behind boxes, placing them in people's purses, in all these different various ways. And for whatever reason, on that particular day, I don't know if it had anything to do with that prayer or not. I'll let you decide. He looks down in his cart, and there's a $100 bill with the word Benny written on it. So he calls Dad. Dad, I prayed. What should I buy for the unsheltered? Well, I didn't really get all that excited. I'm probably a bad dad. I don't know. I'm like, that's cool. That's what God does. Okay, this is what we need. Like and then later I was sitting there and I was thinking about this and I'm going, wait a second. Maybe somebody needs to hear this. And so I put a short version of it up on Facebook. So in that, the reach of it, the person that is the editor of a magazine lives on the East Coast. I don't know him. Somehow the story went from somebody to somebody to somebody. I have no contact with, never heard the guy's name before, and I have a message pop up going, can I use this story in my magazine? Strange. I'm convinced the world is hungry for what you have. They're just not really sure how to go about experiencing it. And usually when I share this with people about how to experience it, if they were to go on the journey, maybe that would be similar to some of us. I have to give them the sad reality that to fully experience it, you need to lose your religion. And that's too much for some people. Because that's the tangible thing that they can come in and out of and choose to be a part of or not. They can choose whether they like this one versus that one. Rather than the reality of God in your life, walking with you, talking with you, being with you, altering your surrounding by His very presence. Why wouldn't God give you $100 bill? Doesn't it say that He's the Father that gives good gifts? And that we don't ask, therefore we don't receive? And then he goes, but the problem is that if you do ask, well, a lot of time it's with the wrong attitude. My son's attitude was asking not for self, but asking for others. It was an absolute pure request. It had nothing to do with what he was going to get out of the deal. It was everything about what God was going to give through him. Totally different. Religion tries to get us to be good girls and boys on a scale where we get like credits. How would you give credits in your relationships? Think about this. Simona's not here. I can probably talk about her safety, right? Imagine if Simona and I had this environment where I'm concerned about whether I'm building up credits in Simona's little chart she has on me on the refrigerator. Like the potty chart when we were potty training our kids. Right? You use the restroom appropriately 4 times and you get a piece of candy.
A sticker.
Or a sticker or whatever. Imagine if Simona did that for me in that, well, Dale did this husbandly thing that is appropriate today. One more and he gets, well, whatever. Or how about it is that we're doing life together? And that when I go do something, it's as though she's doing it. And when she goes and does something, it's as though I did it. Because we're joined in all things. This is what God wants for you. That when you go do something, it's as though God did it. And when He goes and does something, it's as though you did it. Because you and God are inseparable. In relationship. In covenant with each other. His breath flowing through you. Putting oxygen into your blood. So that you can move about and exist, as Paul said. I'm convinced that the only way to have significant transformative change in any of our lives is to enter into that completely.
Wow.
And it's not by our doing, it's by his having already done what he did. And so here in Hebrews chapter 17, it says what? It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac. It was by faith that Roman prayed. Why $100? I don't know, but it was by faith. Not a scale about, well, why didn't he ask for more or whatever? Those questions came into my mind going, well, what if? There's a lot of what ifs. By faith, Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice, and this is where I dislike my translation of the Bible because it doesn't use the term theos, or it does not use the term kyrios. It doesn't use God or Lord in the text. It just says when he was tested. Really important. Because we just read in James that that's not one of the attributes that God's going to do. All right? Just for clarity, it's important that we have clarity on that. We got to stop blaming God for things. It is not his fault. And so he goes on. Even though God had told Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted, Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, check this out, God was able to bring him back to life again, and in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. Because in his mind, he knew God so well that he knew that God would not revoke his promise, and he would not take away the symbol or the sign or that which was representative of the promise through the son, the promised son Isaac. That God would not revoke his oath. So even to the point of looking into what looked like certain death, death did not look to him, to Abraham, as though somehow that was the end of the promise. Somehow he was able to see beyond his view of what would be the grave, the view of which would be heartache, the view of that which would be the unthinkable. And that he knew God so well that regardless of circumstance, he knew that God would do absolutely what he had promised. Because God doesn't just offer promises, he offers realities. So I shared with a couple of you this morning that Simona and I had our interview with the administration at the conference this week. And one of the things that, I don't know what point in the conversation it came up, but the idea of the second coming and the Advent and all of that. And I felt impressed at some point in time in that to make things clear about where I'm at on that. And that somehow I feel like there's a dysfunction and an obsession with the second coming of Christ. Hear me out. Don't judge me yet. I'm as excited as the rest of you for the reality that Jesus Christ is going to come back again. I am very excited about that. But I want everyone that I meet to have an experience and to have the understanding that I'm not waiting for that so that I can begin my relationship with him, or that somehow I've been separate from him and now that we're together, I'm with him right now. Because if we're living as though we're separate and waiting for this thing, then a lot happens in between. As me viewing there's some kind of absence in the relationship. That would be like me if I was if I was a robot and I was powered by a battery, it'd be like me being separate from my battery, waiting for someone to bring my battery back to me. That makes no sense. I'm not left here on this earth without the power of God. Neither are you. I have everything I need right now, so do you. We have a God that said that you're his kids. We have a brother that died to heal the relationship when Adam and Eve committed prostitution. They didn't break a religious vow. They broke the sanctity of a relationship. They had an affair with the devil. So how would a religion fix the relationship? It cannot. Only one of the parties in the relationship can fix that. Therefore, you were rendered forgiven, declared righteous because of your brother, Jesus Christ. So Abraham's having a real relationship. It's a real thing. And go to Genesis with me. And we're going to go to Genesis chapter 22. So I don't want to, actually let's start the end of Genesis 21. I lied to you, sorry. The last couple of verses here, Genesis 21, verse 33. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba. Remember, Beersheba means well of the oath. Place where there was the life-giving source, water, the place of the oath, the well of the oath. Place where something occurred, where there was an agreement, a covenant. Representing the need for life itself. And there he worshipped the Lord. Here, this is Jehovah in the English transliteration. Really important. Pay attention to the words that are used for God here. If you go back into the Hebrew and you read it in the Hebrew, the term here for Lord is Jehovah. Okay? So he goes on. He says he worshiped Jehovah, the eternal Elohim. Really important, guys. So, early on in the biblical context, Elohim was often used as this generic, general term for God. So kind of like if I prefer to wipe my nose, which I do a lot because I have allergies, right? It's one of the things you enjoy about your pastor is I break all the speaking rules, public speaking, and do that. I could use my sleeve, and that might be better, but... So, I have some of my cousins here, and I want to share a real quick sidebar on this. It's part of what I'm going to share as an example. I have a Grandma Sprecher on my mom's side of the family, and I have these memories of church. And getting ready for church, and when she was there, this was really important, and she liked things to be ironed, and she liked things to be all tidy, and she liked things to be all set and play. She carried this stuff called Sin in her purse. And it was like this licorice mint thing that, if you had bad breath, she'd try quietly, she'd pass Sin around during church. There was something else with regards to Kleenex. She always had a hanky. And she'd use it to wipe her nose, blow her nose, whatever. It was handy for a lot of different things. And I have embedded in my mind the times when I maybe didn't lick my lips or I left toothpaste on the side of my mouth, and my loving grandma would spit in her hanky and rub whatever was on my face off. And sometimes it made a crackling sound when she unfolded it. Can't unhear that, can't unsee it, can't unexperience that. It was an act of love. Right? My point in that is that when I say Kleenex, you guys have an idea of a box of Kleenex, and it starts with a K, and it's over there, and you can almost see the logo on it. And so people will say, you know, I need a Kleenex, but they may be in a place where all they had was puffs. So you don't stop and you go, oh wait, no, I don't have Kleenex. No, you hand them the box of puffs. But there's somehow an association with this thing that you're going to wipe your nose with as being a Kleenex. And then there's the terminology, like for instance with a tissue. I need a tissue. Right? Yeah, because I got an issue. Yeah, that's right, brother. Yeah. And so Elohim was like saying tissue. Eternal God is like saying Kleenex. The original. Specific. So he was saying, my God that I'm worshiping is not just like tissue, not just some general sense. Distinguishing. Because in this era, there were people that worshipped gods. And if you go back and you read the gods that were mentioned there, they would often add to the name El. Short for Elohim, showing a generalization for the god or gods or whatever it was they were worshiping. And so Abraham is making a distinction here. He's going, not to be confused with these other gods. Jehovah. Right? The Kleenex tissue. The real deal. The original. Not just some generic thing. Really specific so that no one misunderstood. And that's important as you go on in the story. And Abraham lived as a foreigner in the Philistine country, and now we go into chapter 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. That term there for God is Elohim. Not eternal Elohim, not Jehovah. Just generic. Interesting. We just learned that God does not tempt. The real God. But God will allow things to occur. He will allow temptation to occur. Remember Jesus Christ? The Father allowed him to be tempted. He went away and he was tempted. God will allow us to be tempted. But he has a way out. There's a reason why the New Testament Bible writers learned what they did, and they said what they did, and they encouraged the way they did, in that when this time of testing is over, right? We see all those promises, and that when you are tested, know that God will not allow it to go beyond what you can handle, because God knows you better than yourself. People hate that verse. They call it a cop-out, and they go, Pastor, I don't want you to say that. Because we want to decide the level of testing that we go through. And truth be told, if we decided the level of testing, we would probably choose no testing. I wonder what our maturity level spiritually would be. Every time you grow spiritually, you're going to be tested.
That's true.
Just how it is.
Hello?
So, the story,
That's what kid.
he's told to go to the land of Moriah. Going back through this place, remember when Abraham first came into the land, he went to the tree of divination there around the oaks of Morah and so on, where they taught divination and they taught how to summon demons and all those kinds of things back in that era. And he's in that place when he hears from the real God, the original God. He's in the place where there's worship of these other gods, and he's listening to the real one in the place where it's taught to listen to the other ones. So he's going off to this land where in that environment, it wasn't unusual for the worshipers of these other gods to sacrifice on the hills over in this region, and now he's supposed to go to that region and he's supposed to go sacrifice his son. This might create a dilemma for some of us. But he gets up the next morning, verse 3, saddled his donkey, he took 2 of the servants with him along with his son. Then he chopped wood for the fire. Imagine, think about chopping that wood. Think about what's going through your head as you're chopping that wood. You're saddling up. We're heading off. Hey, my $100 son just got here. Yeah. Then he chopped wood for the fire for the burnt offering and set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day of their journey, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Stay here with the donkey, Abraham told the servants. This is really important in the story, the next verse. The boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will come right back. Abraham was convinced that no matter what occurred from that point going up to the mountain to worship,